I'm Curtis.
How are you?
Have a seat right here.
Okay. And Brett will have you at that here, and I'm going to try to get
Y'all
out of the
sit.
way.
Have a seat here.
I'm going to have.
Okay. Now, you want to spell your name for me?
J-U-D-Y.
All right. Oops. Hold
I'll
on.
have you sit right here.
Most certainly
This is
will.
our friend Brett. Will help me out.
A-U-D-Y.
S-T.
Oops. Didn't do it. J-U-D-Y.
S-T-O-V-E-R. S-T-O-V-E-R. That's for Stover Candy. Williams.
All right. Was Stover your middle name?
Stover
maiden
is
name?
my maiden name, yes.
What I'll do is I'll check that one
know.
first because the less names we have, the better.
Okay, all
So
right.
we'll do Judy Stover first. We've got Judy Stover in Cartersville. Oh, that's
Find
what
about this on TV, or how'd you
You
find
don't
out
have
about
one
our
name. I'm going
event?
to take that name.
Oh,
now.
excellent. You were
I'm
quick.
putting your last name.
Well, the good news
What was your
is
last name?
What we're going to do is we're going to have Curtis to come up and talk to us a little bit, and then we'll have a chance to have questions from the group. Thank you, Curtis.
I don't know why I write things down. I can't read my writing anymore. Not only can I not read the scribbles, but I can't see it. This job has not been kind to me. When I started, I didn't have gray hair, and I certainly didn't have about 10 pairs of these $3 glasses you buy at cable. Treasurer's office. Treasurer's office is going well. It's an honor and a privilege to be your treasurer. It's funny, I'm now about 18 months into it, and I realize what an accidental politician I am. I never thought I was to be in politics. People spend most of their time trying to get into politics. You know, if you like politics, you're always around it. And so you prepare for years. I spent the last 10 years mainly outside of America doing my humanitarian charity work. So I came back and I got mad, and I had just a few weeks to decide to run for office. So I jumped in, and now here I am. It was an interesting trip because one of the things that really made me want to run for office was that they told me that nobody had ever beaten a Republican in a statewide primary. And, you know, I got to thinking about that, and it just made me mad. It was like the Politburo. You know, you get the Jobs for Life, the GOP Jobs for Life program. We're supposed to be the party of smaller government and, you know, citizens, people, and yet we can get a job and keep it until we just decide to go through with it. Even the Politburo changes over occasionally, albeit they oftentimes use a gun. They still do change chairs. And so it has been interesting. I've enjoyed it. What I found at the treasurer's office was about what I thought. It's just an old and sleepy office. And you take the profit motive out of something, it changes things. You have really, really good people. I mean, really good people. I've got 60 great people who work there. But when you take that profit motive out of an equation like that, it just changes things. So what I found was all of our contracts were old. And that is important for a couple of reasons. What's changed more than finance and technology in the last 15 or 20 years? Nothing more than those two. So our banking contract has been out 13 years. Can you imagine that? How many of y'all look at your banking once a year? We hadn't gone out for 13 years. The difference is when I cut prices, we save $1 million a year, every year. And that was the first part of the RFP. We've got more of the RFP to come along. And now we're dealing in the security part and the service part of it. So it's meaningful to y'all in that your money's more protected. We can do more with it. We can invest it more easily. And it's safer. Plus, we save $1 million a year. Only because we just put it out for bids. We have a $24 billion custodial contract. We have a $24 billion custodial contract. That's the custody bank that keeps all of our assets, all of our stocks, all of our bonds. It hadn't been out to bid effectively for 30 years. 30 years. And I'll tell you, I know why. It's a lot of work. We put that out, it's been over a year and we're not finished yet. We could probably fill the stage up with paper, but we're going to get it finished here shortly. Again, it's going to be less expensive, we're going to have more services, and it's going to cost us less money. So in each and every one of these things, it's not the kind of stuff that people are overly interested in, because you just think your treasurer should do that for you. You shouldn't have to worry about it, right? But you do have to worry about it. And so that we're taking care of these things. The College 529 program, that's one of the best things the government does. It lets you save money for college for your loved ones, tax-free. As long as you keep the money in the program, you defer those taxes, and then at the end of it, if you spend it for the college and an accredited expense, which is most everything, you're tax-free. Best thing about this, and this is the crazy thing, because the government doesn't do things like this. I can take it out for little Bobby. And decides maybe little Bobby wants to be a Marine, doesn't want to go to college. He wants to be a Marine. I can just swap it to little Susie. And where do you get flexibility like that from the government? You don't. Say if I want to do it for myself, I can swap it to my husband or my wife. See, so it's a great program. You can do all sorts of things, and that's that shows you what government can do when they want to. It had been out for bid in 10 years. We put it out for bid, and it's all just about finished. The new advertisement went up this week. You'll start seeing it. And if you're not in the College 529 program for your kids or your grandkids, you'll want to be in. So enough of the slightly boring stuff about the treasurer's office. It is not the kind of thing that people drive a lot of distance to go see. But I will tell you this. It's the important thing. We think a lot about what we see on Fox News. Or if you're a liberal, we think a lot about what they see on MSNBC Citizen. But so much of all that is just a big opera. It's theater. It's corporate, profit-driven media making money off of us. I'm not saying it's all wrong. Please don't get me wrong. But you have to be careful, because when government matters is where it actually does something. Your Comptroller General, your Secretary of Agriculture, your governor, your treasurer, your new House members. That's what's important. That's going to lead me to my next point. The next point is transparency and accountability. I come along at a bad time because a lot of people talk about transparency and accountability. But you know what? They're always talking about transparency and accountability, but it's about you. It's never about me, right? It's always about your neighbor. Your neighbor's grass is a little high, and you're going to be a little critical about it. You just don't want to look too closely at your grass. Well, it's a real problem. I think back to my first date. It's not too personal because not much happened, I can promise you. I was 14 and a half years old, and I couldn't drive. So my mom, it was supposed to be my dad, but then the greatest act of humiliation ever, my mom shows up to drive us. And so a girl who I now realize I should have married, didn't. We go to the fair together. Now, you can imagine I was a perfect gentleman. And we had a nice time, came back, even had $3 or $4 in my pocket when I got back. Last time that ever happened on a date. Why? Because somebody was there that I respected and that I knew was watching me. And that's what transparency and accountability comes down to. It's code, for me, it's code for honor and integrity. When you're off by yourself and nobody's watching, you can certainly get in trouble. And we all know that. We're all born sinners, and we do the best we know how, and we try to hope that we live a good life. In government, you deal with huge sums of money, and Treasurer's Office does. You can get in trouble in a hurry. The Department of Transportation. I heard that this time last year that they were overspending. I heard that they couldn't pay their contractors. Now, that's not one of my constitutionally prescribed agencies, but I do write their checks. I do bank them. So I'm nosy and I'm curious. And when I get curious, people know that they're watch out. So we started studying them. And I determined they were $25 or $30 million upside down. Not that big of a deal because it's a $1.1 billion agency. That's a lot of money, right? $1.1 billion. So if they found a way to get $25 or $30 million out of cycle, that's okay. I have a credit card in my pocket. I use it when I get out of cycle, right? So we all do that. We all know about, especially if you're in business, we all know about cash flow. I said, let's just loan them the money. I've got $12 billion that I invest every night, roughly. Let's just loan the money. Interest rates are low. They'll pay us back in 6 months. It's one branch of the government loan to the other, and it'll be fine. What we want to do is make sure that we pay our contractors and we pay our road people. They didn't want to hear any part of that. I couldn't figure out why. I thought it was just politics. I found out why later on. They weren't $25 million in the hole. They weren't 35. They weren't 45. They weren't 55. Now, I can keep going, but the story is real long. One time we were in a meeting, smaller group of people about like right here, and I said, I'll treat them like I would do a teenager. So I blurted out, y'all are $120 million over and out of cycle. Thinking they'd say, oh no, we're only 80 million, right? They just looked at me, blank stare, didn't say a word. And I'm thinking, surely they're not more than that. Turns out they were $400 million out of cycle. They had spent, to try to keep up with the stimulus money, they had spent money in a way that wasn't smart. They gave a bunch of road contractors money without preconditions. So if the weather was good, they finished early, and they even got bonuses. Well, so Because I won't get into it because it gets boring. But so that's how far out of cycle that was. Well, what does that mean to y'all? It means that like in after August money, which is code for bonus money for the highway department, we lost $38 million. It means that we cut regular road maintenance by $60 million, $30 million one year, $30 million the next year. It means, and these are the figures that you never hear what they really cost. We had crews of people, it could be as many as y'all, sitting someplace because they didn't have road materials to work on. So I wasn't very happy about this, and I started thinking about what I could do. So transparency and accountability. You work with them. If they don't work with them, you put them on the front page of the paper. That gets their attention. So we put them on the front page of the paper for 3 or 4 weeks. We had some success, but I never felt good about it. The biggest problem is I can't look in there and really see because they're opaque. They are not transparent. So I kind of get bored with it. I've done all I can do. I can't make anything else happen, so I go along and I'm working on some other projects. But I am in New York when they go for their bonds. You know, I'm the bond agent for the state. We handle all the debt. So I'm sitting there at S&P, the rating agency. You've heard of them. They're the ones who downgraded the U.S. this time last year. I'm sitting in that big, nice office, and I know the folks now. This is where we do our hearings. That's where they rate our credit. And I'm paying attention, and I'm paying attention. And I'm doodling a little bit, too, because I've read all this. And then the secretary goes off script, the Secretary of Transportation. And he starts talking about all the changes they made since I put them on the paper. For the first time in 119 years, they have an engineer that is not the finance person. They have a real finance person that's actually a finance person. For the first time in 117 years, they have a procurement officer. You know, all these things that we take for granted. Any woman or man in this room that's ever been in business just assumed they had a high-level finance person in charge of finance. No. They now take their money from the federal government and pay their bills first instead of paying their bills last. Their software was so old and so out of date that they couldn't tell you if a bill was 1 day old or 120 days old or 365 days old. Now, don't you remember your grandma used to put her envelopes in a line? You know, even your grandmother knew that. But they didn't. So all these things that were not transparent and they were not accountable. And they fixed it. Did they fix enough to make me happy? No. The General Assembly wanted to restructure them, but they couldn't get the votes, and I knew they couldn't. What I had asked them to do was to do the one thing, which is have the internal auditors report to the outside. That way you'd enforce transparency. They didn't do it. So we're going to have problems again, but we're way ahead of where we were, and we still look at it, so we're going to keep fighting. Transparency and accountability are the only way to get value for your money. Our roads and our bridges are safer because we made them adopt some principles. We're not where we want to be, but that's life. We take what we can get and we'll come back. You may have been reading about the investment commission. That's the biggest problem I've had so far. It's a simple mathematical equation here. You know, all this high finance is very complicated. It takes me a lot of time to get the way through this. But $25 billion plus a fetish for secrecy equals trouble. Now think about this, $25 billion. You know the state budget's about $23.5 billion. You can see it on TV, you can go watch it, you know all the senators' names, you can read about it in the newspaper, you can go read the official transcripts. At the Investment Commission, how many of y'all ever heard of it? How many of you know anybody on it besides me? Do you know when they meet, where they meet? Do you know what they do? It's $25 billion. It's bigger than the state government. And it's been sitting on one floor, on the 15th floor, in fact, of the good old boy towers. Remember that? The good old boy towers, the AT&T building in Columbia. Treasurer is on it because of his office. So I got on there. I thought I'd stay 6 months, and I'd get off. I just learn how it works and get off and appoint somebody. Because all the other members of the Budget Control Board, they have to appoint somebody. But the treasurer can stay on. I found out I couldn't get off. I found out that this $25 billion has no oversight. That the chairman, who is now being investigated by state law enforcement and the ethics department or commission for self-dealing, for making money off the fund, he told the Budget Control Board, even after his investigation was announced, he told them, we don't need oversight. We are our own oversight. And not a member of the board got up and threw something. Now, I've been told specifically, the governor sent somebody, for God's sake, please, 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 let us get through this meeting. So I was good. Well, I was pretty good. I wasn't great, but I was good. But you've got to understand, everybody in this room thinks, well, go fix it. But on the other side, there's not a person that wants to fix it. They talk the game, but see, if you've been in office, you can be tainted because you didn't fix it last year, or the year before, or the year before. If you're kind of new to office, we'll want to do something now. It's complicated. And when you start talking about $25 billion, unless I miss my guess, there's probably nobody in here that's ever really dealt with that kind of money. The friction money, they call it, the fall-off money, is enough to let you retire for the rest of your life. Each and every deal we do is $200, $300, $400 million. I get faxes in my office because I'm the custodian of the funds. They'll fax over something and say, send $250 million to Ernest Partners in the Campbells. That's it. And a number. Well, I've stopped all that. They had where the chairman could send any amount of money he wanted. No second signature. Now, how many of you work for a school district and work for a business and just two signatures, maybe four, it depends? One. And it wasn't even a real one, it was a stamp. So, I could bore you, I could get into the high and heavy-duty finance. Well, let's just say that I'm compulsive about certain things. And especially when somebody tells me no. They tell me that I can't read those contracts. Well, I'm going to read those contracts. Each one of them is about this thick. I'm not kidding. And I've read, now it's 11 of them. And I've read them front to back. I've read them twice. I'm not an expert, but I was telling Brian, I feel like I'm Strom Thurmond and Abraham Lincoln. I'm reading for the law. You remember when you could do that? I read these contracts. And the worst thing they could ever do is tell me that I couldn't read them. Because now that I've read them, I know more than they do. Because they don't read them either. The truth of the matter is that people like us, the little people, the people that write our checks in there, we send our money, huge amounts of money when it gets there. We think that it's being protected. So the many people send huge amounts of money to the few where we think it's being protected, and it's a myth. It is a myth. To my knowledge, there is not another treasurer in the country that has read these contracts. And I haven't asked them all, but I've asked most of them. They don't read the funding agreements. They don't read the side letters. They don't read the subscription documents. They don't read the PPMs, the private placement menus, things that I didn't know existed until I became treasurer. Now I know a lot about it. All across the country, these huge pools of money are being bled to death by insiders. It's a narcissistic world where people come around and say, hey, Jenny, we sank $350 million today in Brookstone. What do you think about that? Well, that's pretty good. That's how they talk about money. And I don't want to denigrate them on a personal level, but it's like you've seen people around a football stadium, around a car race. Everybody wants to talk football. Everybody likes to kind of feel like they're in the game. This is heady business. If you're in the high finance, it's pretty cool to say, I called Jamie Dimon the other day, he's president of JP Morgan. You may have read about him because his bank lost $4 billion last month. But to them, those are the rock stars. And that's the world. It's incestuous. You work for a brokerage house, and then you come and work for a estate plan. Or your cousin's working over here. And it's huge money. A guy can sell one deal and retire. The people I deal with come to work in helicopters every day. If the weather's bad, they may have to take a limousine. That's a bad thing. So we deal with different kinds of people. They're not all evil. It's just the world they live in. They will roll their eyes and they make fun of me. They call me grandma behind my back over the definition. Because I say we should actually reconcile our bills. We have people who send us bills. And the bill can be $15 or $20 million at a time. At the end of the year, it may total $50 or $60 million with no explanation whatsoever. So you can have, what they do is that they'll send us a quarterly check, but it's actually an electronic impulse. It's a wire. It wires into our account. And let's just pretend it's $25 million. Then they jerk $2 million, $3 million, some amount of money back, and that's their payment. But in that may be partnership fees, organizational fees, incentive fees, performance fees. It may be an insurance net on top, derivative thing. It could be 6 or 7 different kinds of fees. So what I liken it to, if I go to the grocery store and I fill up my trunk, and I got $500 worth of groceries. I come home, I open the trunk, I put the receipt in my pocket, and I ask my wife, I say, did I pay too much for the eggs? Well, how's she going to know? She doesn't know what the groceries cost. She doesn't know what else everything else costs. How's she going to know? That's how they figure out our fees. We don't know exactly what we pay. We figure it because the asset balance floats up and down. And that's accepted in that world. And I'll never accept it because I'm a businessman. You send me a bill and I'm going to tally it. And if I can't tally it, you're going to explain it to me. You think if I send Goldman Sachs a bill for $49 million, they're going to pay it without asking me questions? They're not. So, I'm not going to get off into high finance too much because it can be very boring, especially when somebody's in a hurry, and you're not particularly interested in that. What is important here, I think, is your money. I took an oath. I've sworn an oath. My 81-year-old father was on the steps beside me. My 77-year-old mother was out there just a few feet away. I took an oath to protect your money. And this is the biggest fight that I'll probably ever be in my life because it's the biggest pot in this state. Special interest is around it. They're going to protect themselves. They're going to make money off this fund, and they're going to continue unless we can break it. We've got some good headway, and I'm hoping that this is going to happen this fall, and so that people can really see what happens to their money. They can really see who's protecting their money and who's not. We worry sometimes about things we shouldn't worry about. We don't have a lot of control about what goes on in Washington. We elect people to go to Washington. We've got, 6 now congressmen and 2 senators. I'm not saying we shouldn't be interested, don't get me wrong, but we have limited ability to affect change in Washington because it is absolutely irreparably broken. And given some catastrophe or something, it's not going to change. But we can have a real effect on what goes on here in South Carolina. But I bet you, if you search your heart, you probably know more about Scott Walker and Nancy Pelosi than you do about your school board chairman and your county council chairman. And that's the way it is all across this country. And we've got to somehow change that. I think one reason that, I know some people know everything about it. So I'm going to finish with this. What's the prescription? A lot of people have a lot of solutions to this problem. For me, I go back to my childhood. I was raised in the Protestant church. Not everybody here was, but in South Carolina, it's a good chance that you were raised in one of the wings of the Protestant church, or you were at least acculturated by it. The New Testament is all about service. We talk about service all the time. And what we're doing in politics is we're electing masters, we're not electing servants. The Bible teaches us that we not only serve the Lord, but we serve each other. And we serve each other first. And we don't do that. We elect people that are masters and not servants. What is the one universal law? No, it's not that if you drop an apple that falls. That's physics. It's not that. There are lots of laws you think are universal. They're not. Every voter in every district in this country will tell you that the minute a politician gets elected, he starts running for re-election. Is there anybody that doesn't believe that? Everybody believes that. We need to throw them out of office. I don't care how good they are, because the minute you start worrying about what office you're going to run for and what you're going to, if you're going to run for election, is the minute you sign on to mediocrity. You cannot fight big battles, and you can't make people mad if you're worried about getting their votes.
That's right.
I have people ask me all the time. Now, at some point, I'm going to have to make that leap. That, am I going to run for re-election? Am I going to run someplace else? But we now accept the fact that the day after the presidential election, that the next election starts in earnest, and we're going to have people who will have billboards up running for governor. That's too early. The presidential cycle is too early. Obama and Romney are beating up on each other, and besides the people in this room, most people don't care. They don't know, they're not interested. We're electing masters. We think it's about them. We're not electing servants. What does the Bible say about servants? We all know the saying, no man can serve 2 masters. You remember the rest of that? No man can serve 2 masters, because given enough time, you'll begin to love one and hate the other. Now, if a politician is trying to serve 2 masters, you are one master, and the politician is the next master, who do you think he's going to love? And who do you think he's going to despise? Or you. If we aren't prepared as politicians to get on one knee, bow before the people that elect us, then we don't deserve to be there. And that's what we've got to have. I would rather serve under a Democrat that truly cares about people. I'm not talking about some limousine liberal type. I'd rather serve under a Democrat that cares about me and my rights and my life more than his, than a Republican who just wants to get reelected. And if I were a liberal Democrat, I would feel the same way. I'd rather have a Republican. We have got, and I'll say it for the last time, we've got to elect servants and not masters. And that means at some point we're going to have to turn on people in our own party. It means in a state like South Carolina that's overwhelmingly Republican, we've got problems. It bothered me so much, and I never knew quite why when they told me that nobody had ever beat a sitting Republican in a primary. I couldn't figure out why. Then I realized why. One, the game is rigged against everybody. And two, it's because the masters all club together.
Yep.
In this whole thing with the investment commission, the one thing you always have to remember is politicians might fight with each other a little bit. But when one of them's being attacked, they pretty much all come on it. Because they all have that identity. They see each other. They're the class of leaders. And I see myself as an employee of the treasurer's office. I never even think of myself as being a treasurer. We work a lot of hours. You know that. We have a lot to do. So with that, I think I've covered all the important stuff I wanted to say. I love to ask some questions because, quite frankly, I don't get out of the office as much as I should. My job is transactional, so I have to spend a lot of time there. And I love to ask the questions on anything. I only give you one caveat. Don't ask it if you don't want an answer. Yes, sir.
How concerned are you about municipal bond default on a large scale?
Not really, not much, because they always have the powers of tax. There'll be a few that are bad, but the municipal bonds we're involved with that, they just raise their taxes. So it's not really them defaulting.
They're not headed towards Stockton, California?
No. Well, Stockton's, there's a few odd ones like that, but it's not wide scale. And California is probably one of the worst. You know, there are laws out there such that they may not be able to even file. I mean, the game is rigged against them. What will happen is they will have to raise taxes on their people, which means that more people will leave into the ghost towns in the end. Yes, sir.
I know this isn't really your bailiwick, but I wanted to ask, how do you feel about the unfunded pension liability and health care liability here in South Carolina? I understand the pension liability is about $14 billion, and the health care liability is about $16 billion.
The pension liability is 14, and it's going to probably go up because GASB's changing the government accounting standards. It's going to change their rules. Health care is about $9 billion. It's terrible, but that's a perfect example. You'll love this. In the year 2000, our pension system was paid in full. We may have owed a couple $100 million, but in a big program, it's nickels and dimes. Now, 13 years later, we're $14 billion. It was Terry and a few other programs that mainly benefited a small group of people. If you were a roads keeper on the maintenance crew, or if you were a new teacher, or if you were an assistant or a clerk in the state office building, you can't afford to retire at 52 or even 48. You've got to work. You're going to work until you're 65. You're going to work till somebody kicks you out of there, right? So who was retiring? And Terry. And Terry was legal, and so it was no shame on anybody who did it. If anybody here did it, good for you, because it was legal. But who mainly Terry? It was the wives and the husbands of people who were doctors and lawyers or businessmen. There were people who had jobs but didn't really have to have them. No slight to them. So what you had was people who were making a second income. They were able to retire, stay on the job, get half of their retirement income in addition to their pay, and then 5 years later they walk out the door. They take their money out of the bank then, so they've got $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 in cash that they were able to save because of that. They had been paid all along, and then only the state government, with 2 weeks later, they got hired back. And so that's what happened. I call it sky high, and then this big unfunded liability. The people who don't want to address the investment commission are the same people who sat there and watched Terry. They've been told for years Terry was expensive. They've been told for years that the automatic cost of living adjustments were expensive, and we didn't book them and fund them at the time. So it was all known, And they sat there and watched them. Because you know why? They all wanted to get reelected. And so that's why we have that. So we have almost $20 billion in debt. It's our largest debt we have, all because nobody said a word. Yes, ma'am.
I read an article in the Nerve, you passed it along, but saying lawmakers have, they make the pay hikes. Do you have anything to do with that kind of budgeting? Because they said something around, they kind of slipped in a $2.5 million budget for 2013 for their pay hikes, and the highest paid administrator, staffer is over $152,000. What do you have to do with that?
Well, all I do is write the checks. You know, state government is an amazing place. We have people who are really overpaid, and then we have people who are really underpaid. And that's a real problem. We have too many vacation days. If you've been there a long time, you end up with 3 or 4 weeks vacation, plus all the state holidays. And the state employees know they have too many. It was something politicians gave them along the way. I hope, one of the reasons I hope to get rid of or to be through with the worst part of this investment commission debacle is because I want to go to zero-based budgeting. I want to spend the time on that. If we could do zero-based budgeting, I'd like to see us buy time back from the state employees. Because you know, my assistant in the office, she makes a very healthy salary, she does very good work, but she really can't use her vacation days. It's just too much time. When the question is, if you've got, say, 10 people in one office and they all just can't use their vacation time because they just don't have anything to do, you know, how much vacation can you actually take? Then you have to wonder, do you really have a job? Yeah. So my thought is we start working a way that we say to the state government, you've all got X amount of days, we're going to take one of them back from you. But we're going to pay you more each year for that one day. Because what that does is it becomes an honest bargain. We'll pay you for so many days of work. We're not going to pay you to be on the job and then be off. It'll lower our costs in the long run. In my private business, I had to do this exact same thing. Sick days, we get a certain amount of sick days. If they don't take a sick day, pay them for half of it. We end up better off. So there's all kinds of things we can do. Zero-based budgeting is very important. Because what we do now is we say, if you got $6 million last year, you're going to apply for $6 million plus 5% or 10%. We're going to make you justify this first $6 million to start with. Yes, sir.
How do you account for a situation with school superintendents, for example, where we've got 5 school superintendents in this state that get paid over $181,000 a year, and yet in other areas, school superintendents make $50,000.
I would have
How
thought
does it get so out of line?
I would have thought there were more than 5. I know that there's at least one that has a salary, that has it in his contract that every time he renegotiates, he gets paid 10% more than the next closest guy to him. So, of course, he runs his average up and everybody chases him. And they're all Terry. So if they're making $181,000, they're probably making another 60 or 75 or 80 as a Terry employee. They do real well. I'm a supporter of schools because I like private schools and charter schools, Christian schools, and home schools too. People need to be paid, but all of this needs to be brought in the line. We don't, on the state level, we don't do a very good job because we pay most of the fringe benefits of these folks. We need to cap them. We need to say, you want to pay these people outrageous salaries, fine. But you pay that extra benefit. So it's a real problem. The biggest problem we have there is most of those decisions are made by the school board, and school boards in most places in the state get elected with 400 votes or something. And they're the biggest single tax authority that there is. Yeah. Probably half of your county taxes are schools. Yes, sir.
In doing your job, and it sounds like you're doing a great one, how much interference are you getting from D.C.?
Hardly any.
Should there be any?
No, shouldn't be. I hope not. Yeah. And we don't actually pay much attention to them when they do. They came to us because the treasurer is also the chairman of the board of financial institutions, state chartered banks and savings and loans, credit unions, and consumer finance. And when they created that new board, the Public Protection and Consumer Board, or whatever it is in Washington, they came to us and wanted us to give them all our information. We said, no, we're not going to do it. Now, they may end up suing us, and we may have to give them a little something, but we're going to drag it out, believe me. Something I found out, too, about that board and it's going to have thousands of employees. They aren't paid on the regular salaries. You're like this. They're not paid on the regular federal government salary. They're on the Federal Reserve salary schedule. So they can come, when we have a $60,000 a year auditor, they say, would you like me 180? Literally $180,000, and there they go. So that's the new government, and that's going to be a problem. And you know, I think that they have some good ideas, and that they will do some good, like as in every law does. But there's so much bad, there's so much money they're going to spend that you know they could have asked the states to do it, and we would have done a lot less expensive. They're in the upstate right now, auditing one of the big title insurance companies. And it was supposed to be a surprise, but everybody on the planet knew they were coming for 3 months, so it's a waste of time. Anything else? Well, let me say this. I don't get out as much as I should, and it is a pleasure to be here. I lump all these kind of groups into one group. I call them my grassroots groups, because y'all are the guys who make everything happen. The reason I got back in politics is I was overseas doing my work, and back when, remember when the first thing started about the Health Care Act, and we started having, in the summertime, a little bit of these public meetings. One guy smarted off a little bit to a congressman, and then the next day somebody else, and then there was a group, and then the Tea Party came up, you know. I was in Italy at that time, and I was watching every day. And after about 2.5 weeks, I said, I'm going home. Something's happened. I'm going home. And I came home, I came right back smack in the middle of it. And I couldn't stay but a week or two, but I had to see it myself. They'll change the country. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen this election. I have no idea. But I know one thing. You got people thinking, and you got people moving. Now, you got your own problems, because now you're a victim of your own growth. You got everybody wants to analyze you. Everybody wants to tell you what you're doing right, wrong. Everybody wants a piece of it. But I know this. We change the country. We change the country for the better. And people like me who get in at our desk and we don't get a chance much to think about philosophy or what happens, you come out here and you spend time, you listen to the reports. Even the Pledge of Allegiance sounds real here. It doesn't sound that way back in Columbia. So I can't thank you enough. What y'all do is far more important than what I will ever do, far more important what Nikki will do, or Richard, or any of us. Y'all are the people that matter. Y'all pay the bills. And if we don't serve y'all properly, y'all need to stand up. You know, it says render unto Caesar what Caesar's due. It doesn't say render unto Caesar what Caesar can waste and further away. Y'all are doing it. I hope I wish you the best of luck. I hope that you can keep yourselves together and keep having the impact, because this country needs help. You know, I've traveled a lot. I see the world in some ways like an outsider. And I see the things that the state government here, which I used to see in Ukraine. You know, a place where the premier can bring you into his office and literally beat you up and send you out broken, and nobody does anything. I see those, not that far, but I see those types of things here. So we've got to protect our freedoms, and if anybody's going to protect them, I know it's y'all. And so I'm eternally grateful, and I thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, darling. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We need somebody in Columbia watching all that money, Curtis, and you know that if there's anything that the grassroots can do down here, all you have to do is let us know, and we'll try to get it done.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to get these young people home, because you know they have things to do at night.
That's exactly right, and we do appreciate you coming.
I go home and read a contract. I'll go home and go out.
Thank you so much.